this is our webinar to interview our guest, costume designer Glenne Campbell. My name is Stan Edmonds. I'm the department head of makeup design here at Vancouver Film School. And actually, Glenne and I have worked together on a couple of shows. So we're going to discuss, as you saw, the theme of the show having to do with the hidden impact of costume design. And what's interesting is that costumes in film, much like makeup in film, we have many similarities, many things in common as far as our concerns and the kinds of things that we do. So I know that people are sort of popping in here and whatnot. And I think to get started, what I'd like to do, Glenne, is first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
And,
Stan.
I saw, this was interesting, in looking at your credits, because although we've worked together, I haven't looked at your credits in a while. You've done a lot since we've worked together, which is kind of cool. But I did see that you started your career as a costume designer. You may have worked in other positions before this, I'm not sure, with the original Jump Street TV series. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how you got into this industry to start with.
Sure. Thank you. Great to be here, and I hope that everyone learns something from us tonight. I started costuming at the ripe old age of 13. I had seen a movie called Thoroughly Modern Millie when I was about 12. It took place in the 1920s, and I said to myself, that's what I want to do. I want to be a costume designer. I'd already learned how to sew, so it wasn't a stretch in my imagination, but it was a huge stretch in everyone else in the family's imagination. They couldn't imagine that a person could make a living doing that. So I did costume all the kids in the neighborhood. I costumed the drama productions at high school, and then I went straight into professional theater. I worked at Theater Calgary as a stitcher. You know, you got to start at the bottom to learn the ropes and learn to understand how a department works. Did a few different theater things across the country, and then was called for a television production in Edmonton, Alberta, by a person that I had worked at Bastion Theater in Victoria with. And so did that, and then I think it was after that one that I came out to Vancouver, and I was hired to do costume design on 21 Jump Street, which was it was a huge leap for me because the Edmonton production was, you know, a small ITV local production, all Canadians, and pretty simple, super fun. Whereas the 21 Jump Street was the advent of Cannell Productions coming to Canada and setting up at Cannell Studios, they called it then, on the North Shore of Vancouver. It's now called, what is it called now? Brooksbank? No, I can't even remember. I don't even know what it's called now.
I don't know. It's gone through a few names for sure. And
Yeah.
that's funny you said you worked in Edmonton and at ITV, another thing we have in common. I remember doing a few shows there, and I actually used to make a living doing commercials for them. I lived in Edmonton for a while and doing just that. So that is a leap. And that's interesting you said that, because many people have to or decide to work in different areas, whether they're making costumes or whether they're set supervisors and all that sort of thing, before they might want to be an assistant costume designer and then finally a costume designer. How did you make that leap? How did that happen?
Oi, oi, oi. I got the phone call, and I, you know, have been bold all my life. So I said, sure, I'll try it.
Jumped right in. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good.
exactly. So, you know, there I was, a department of one and a half. So you learn by trial and error. There was not any costuming education programs happening in Canada at that point in time. So I had to rely upon my theater background, which, you know, I've noticed a lot of transference of British theater process has come into the Canadian way of making film or television. And I've had a lot of American people say, wow, it's really interesting how you guys do this. And we've picked it up. We really like it. So it's kind of fun
So,
that way.
and then now you're famous because you dressed Johnny Depp when he was a kid. I mean, that's again the things that the 20 somethings are going to think pretty cool.
Yeah. And he was a character then. And
I'm
I
sure.
could foresee his future. And I thought, see where this goes. So I did sort of pay attention to his last scandal just to see how it went.
Yeah, yeah, it's something to watch. Well, as far as costume designer, that title, costume department, and sometimes it's called wardrobe designer. Can you tell us for our audience the difference between wardrobe versus costume?
Sure, wardrobe is something you keep your clothes in. It's a piece of furniture.
Made of wood, yeah.
Yeah. Costume, it's a ranking of our place in society and a story that we're in. It's not fashion, it's costume, and it tells what the power level of a person is, what the economic level of a person is. It tells their story arc. Um, it tells character, and that's what makes it so fascinating, is the character aspect.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the fascinating thing with what we do in the makeup department too. Costume, hair, and makeup reveal character, which helps tell story. And we are part of that team of storytellers, even though we are not always considered that on many shows by producers or directors, or the actors certainly know. Um, you know, the first thing I do, and I wonder if you might comment on this, when I was on a show, the first place I go, when you're hired long before I am. Costume department is very busy, has a longer prep. First thing I do when I would get hired is go to the costume department so I can see the color palette and the textures and how they're dressing the different characters. That's an important piece of information for me to inform me as to how I might approach makeup. Would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely, Stan. And I'm happy to hear that you would take the time to do that. Um, I think that there's very few people who do that now from the makeup and hair department. So I always made an effort to go to them. And I kind of came up with a way of creating a costume storyboard. Um, for approvals. And once I had it all approved, then I would share it with my crew and with the hair and makeup department so that they could see what the color palette was, what the silhouettes are, and what the fit of the costumes are, so that everybody could have an understanding of that. I think as budgets have changed, as you say, the hair and makeup folks are brought in so short ahead of prep. It's all they can do to get their equipment in the door and have the initial meetings that they have to have. So being able to email these storyboards to them has really been a bonus.
Yeah, that's a common complaint, and is just not having enough prep time, and they've cut back and cut back and cut back. And I listen to my students who are now, like, I have 17 years worth of graduates all around the world working in the industry, and even like yourself, many of them have been nominated for Emmy Awards, and I know you've been nominated for 6 awards. You've done many different kinds of genres, which is interesting. And we worked together in two very different shows. Speaking of genres, we did a Western TV series, and then we did Tom Green's movie Freddy Got Fingered, a sort of teen crazy adventure comedy movie, and that's a real contrast. So, do you have a favorite genre, or something that you've enjoyed doing more, or one that you have yet to do?
Well, let's see. I've worked in historical, I've worked in sci-fi, I've worked in contemporary, I've worked in comedy. I loved it all. I just loved it all, and I believe that it's really important to be able to have a broad engagement with all of the factors. I love research. I think that's how I came to doing costume design, is that I just love to go down the rabbit hole and do research and learn about an era, learn about how people survived in the era or didn't, and just what all of their challenges and their solutions were. So,
Yeah, that really adds to little details you can be putting in the design and how you dress somebody. And what's interesting, of course, you did Battlestar Galactica, which is, a huge popular series, even still and whatnot. And so, how would, say, doing an historical picture where there's sort of, research to do, and you need to sort of maybe recreate different time periods versus something that's, say, futuristic, where you're doing designing and building.
you make it all work. Battlestar Galactica, I came to through associates, but it was an absolute pleasure for me to do because I have a background in aviation, in building futuristic aircraft. So, so that kind of, I went, oh, well, two things that I'm able to really experience and express here. So that was really fun. I can remember when I first started on it, and we'd have production meetings, and there'd be some discussion about how the spaceships were flying or the pilots were flying or something. And I'd send a little yellow sticky note across the table to the production designer, and I would say, that's not really how it works. And he would slip it back to me, and he'd written on it, it's all pretend.
Yeah,
So we have
it's
to
just a
remember
movie.
that it's all pretend, but you do your best to try and portray a believable aspect of whatever the craft or art is that you're doing.
Well, that's what we tell our students. It's like you need to know what the real thing looks like. You need to research that. They may not want the real thing. You're informing of that, and they'll make the decisions whether they're going to stylize or fantasize the
Mhm.
design, I suppose. So that was a
Yeah,
good experience on that series, because I know series can be really tough work wise and hour wise.
it was a perfect experience at the perfect time. But just to speak back to your question, historical versus modern. So when I found out I was going to be doing Outlander, I actually went over to Scotland a year before and did a lot of research there. I went to Europe and did research, and it was absolutely fabulous to be able to have that opportunity to learn all of this material firsthand and not just from a book or from the computer. You have to get out there, you have to get into art galleries, you have to go to museums, you have to really learn your material and understand it.
So there's a lot of sort of stock costume houses where, of course, rentals can be had. But have you had the opportunity to then do original historical creation sort of from scratch?
Oh, Outlander was all from scratch.
Oh, wow.
Worked with a
That's great.
fellow, we designed the tartan. And I couldn't impress upon them enough how to, in designing the actual technical aspect of the weave of the material, make it super complicated. This is how it should look, but make the actual technicality of it super complicated so it can't be knocked off. And they said, oh, why would it be knocked off? I said, you guys have no idea what wave is coming at you. So, now they know. It didn't take
Yeah.
them long to catch on that, yeah, there's a great aftermarket.
No, exactly. Isn't it funny how some shows get that kind of popularity and then suddenly there's all kinds of ancillary extra businesses pop up, and or even whether it's even crew members selling little bits of items from shows.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So how so you kind of, it's funny, I keep going back to you sort of starting kind of at the top, which is really interesting. And my experience is similar in that I did not assist a lot. Early in my career, I sort of started department heading, like in Alberta, and features and TV series and stuff, which is kind of rare, and it is sort of being thrown into the deep end. I'm assuming that your team members are really important. How do you go about choosing your crew and your department?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's really important to me that a person have a sense of logistics. So often the film industry is compared to the military. There is set protocols and processes. So it's really important for people to understand that, but it's also important for the leader of the department or the project to explain why it's important. Um, so great communication skills. A person has to have super good communication skills. Um, Quite often I would hire women who were mothers of teenagers, say, or kids
Mm.
that were out on their own, because they totally understood time management and working with people who don't see things the way you see them. That's a really key factor. You have to be able to communicate why it should be blue instead of green and convince. So
Did you often have the same crew and the same team members that you would work on a lot of different shows on?
I would say sometimes. I didn't bank on that because it was really important to me to take time off between productions, just to recharge. I don't think people realize how much energy a costume designer and probably all of the other heads of departments put into the job. Um, when I speak to production managers about rates, I say, what skill sets do the camera operators use? Well, they use aesthetic, they use technical, and they use communication because they're talking to the DOP and the director and maybe the cast. I will say then, well, let's talk about the skill sets the costume designer uses. Obviously aesthetic, you want the cast to look good. Technical, you need to know how to build that historical costume or the sci-fi costume. Communication, well, heck, we're talking to the producers, the director, the DOP, the production directors, the accounting department, sources, suppliers, because we needed everything yesterday. So we need to be able to have a handle on how to make that all work to our benefit. And we're doing media a lot of times too. We get put in front of the cameras ourselves to do media. So, and then of course, the crew. So huge communication aspects. So yeah, we're adding to the skill set publicity. We're adding big time to the skill set psychology
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the actresses and actors, they're phenomenal people. A, that they can memorize lines, in my mind. B, that they can put themselves into a character, and then come out and be themselves again. So it takes a lot of psychology to help them get there and to understand what they want to do with the character, but also to let them know that we support them and we're here to help. So I've always called myself a caregiver as slash costume designer, if you will. um, so
Yeah, we support the actors so they can give the best performances, and that's something that most people don't appreciate. And I think there's a way to do that without it being without it being a kiss up kind of situation to your actors and stuff like that. I think it's important to have that professionalism as well. I wish all these things you just listed and all these skill sets that you would talk to a production manager when negotiating rates. I think I wish I'd talked to you like 30 years ago about some of these things. You made it because it makes a great case. And that's what you have to do with production managers is like lay it all out, especially if they're new and
yes.
or you haven't worked with them before. Our departments, we have this little trinity on set because I deal more with the on-set costumer that you have than I would you, the designer, once the show starts. And hair, makeup, and wardrobe are this little amazing trinity that deal with the actors and everything on set. And it's a great grouping. And we are responsible, though, all of us in these three departments for the look of these characters and what's that suggesting, what the story's telling. It's one of the main visual elements of any motion picture. Anytime an actor's on screen, you're seeing the work of those three departments. And, of course, in old Hollywood days, Albert Wolski, Edith Head, I mean, all the great costume designers, they actually had a lot more control even over hair and makeup because they were the chief designers that would sort of supervise those other departments. And that kind of went away. Do you find that you have a good rapport or how you're establishing that with the hair and makeup department on your shows?
Oh, absolutely, because I like to involve them in the prep work. As I say, I will send out my storyboards, my costume storyboards that are specific to palette, silhouette, and fit and texture. And, whether they look at it before they're on the clock or not, I don't know, but at least I've made an effort to demonstrate where it's going. And I don't share in the design of hair or makeup at all. That's the professionals do that. I don't know anything about it. Can you tell?
But have you ever run into where you go on set, you're looking at actors in your costumes or on a camera test, and you're looking at the hair and makeup and going, that's kind of off. That's not working with my wardrobe, my costumes.
No, I personally haven't had that experience, luckily. I do know over the years of watching films, particularly historic pieces, where the hair tends to look like the hair of the day because there's still
Yeah.
supposed to be the sex appeal of the actors going on or whatever. So that throws a story for me. That really throws a story.
Me too. Me too. It's like, you're watching a Western, but they have like 1980s makeup for some reason for the saloon girls. And but again, that's
Yeah.
not always our decision, sadly.
Right, right.
I, I wonder if you could open up this subject and maybe explain what you mean when you talk about the unspoken impact of costumes in filmmaking.
Yes, well, it's really important as an artist to be able to see the unseen. And so I'm always looking for how to showcase the unseen and how to make something better. So in my mind, um, the costume department does elevate a picture if the costumes are good. We know that it can destroy it too if the costumes are bad, but it's a super collaborative effort. And I really feel that it's really important for folks who may be thinking about going into any other department but the costume department, that they be aware of how involved costumes is with every other department. I think what really brought this to my mind one time was we'd had a production meeting at Battlestar Galactica, and me and 25 guys in the room, and following the script, and the question kept coming to, well, how's costumes going to deal with this? And I kept saying, sidebar, come to my office afterwards. There was a lineup of 15 people at my desk, and they all looked at each other and said, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And I went, oh, I realized at that point, none of these folks understood how involved costumes is with all of the other departments. So it was kind of cool that they all showed up at the same time and recognized that. And I thought, I have to do something with this someday. So here we are. I'm trying to
Yeah, no,
lead.
it's a fascinating theme. I mean, just the way you worded that, like the sort of unspoken impact. There is a certain lack of appreciation coming from a lack of knowledge that some departments have about us. Or there are some shows, and sadly you'll run into, and I know we've all had that experience, where we're almost seen as an inconvenience and everybody gets their time, but we sort of are shorted on our time because, oh, what do you do? You're fussing with this or fussing with that, not understanding that we're not fussing unnecessarily on something, but it's again, an important visual detail and important to that actor. But
Yes.
it's that's why it's great working with a lot of the really experienced crew members and a lot of the older producers and directors. appreciate and know. Many of them started at the bottom and whatnot. But I found that as working with a lot of newer people in the industry, they would just have less understanding or appreciation of that, or they're just micro focused on only their department, not realizing it's a team effort.
Yes, we're all trying to get to the same goalpost with the nicest moves we can possibly make.
The other thing about an unspoken impact, it sort of strikes me as the things that you are having things appreciated or recognized, that you're working into the design of costumes. And it doesn't mean to say that they're obvious. It's fun kind of doing really subtle things too. And I think you might agree with that, as it's fun doing really obvious things. Do any examples of that come to mind?
Oh boy. I don't know. That's a unique question. I'm sorry you've caught me off guard with that one.
It's how some things might seem very straightforward, but you've worked certain design elements that are very subtle that are going to have an impact that's not as obvious. And then there's some things that are just right out there where the costume's saying so much, so clearly, in communicating to the character and whatnot. I mean, both of those things are fun, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my head's just spinning now thinking of anecdotes that you think they're subtle, and then you walk somebody down the street to take them to set, and they happen to be dressed like a homeless person, and they stop at Crafty, and they're asked to leave. They're like, no, 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 they're with us. So in a way it's kind of subtle. um
I had that very thing happen on the
yeah.
Butterfly Effect, where we had a whole actress made up, drove her in the alley to get into the Ovaltine Cafe, and the production or the locations manager stopped them. Sorry, we're shooting in here today. You can't come in. That made her day. That made her performance, because suddenly it was like, okay, I look the part, I feel the part, and costumes do that. I mean, you put on the clothes, and they're looking at that in a mirror, and suddenly that's a real strong aid to actors.
Yes. There's great debate amongst costume departments regarding the authenticity of period shows, and does the department understand what was really going on? Have they studied period costuming?
Mm.
um, you know, westerns. You and I did westerns, so I can always tell by the shoulder seam on a vest or a man's jacket if the costume department actually understood period costuming of the time. If they're sitting right here where we have them now, then it's just something they picked up at Value Village or something to give that effect. So, and then there's a show called Bridgerton that everybody went, what the heck is this? Because it was just so off the mark as far as fabrics and materials, and silhouettes were kind of there. And I just say, well, they're trying. I never poo-poo anything. I always say, we don't know what the conditions and the limitations were for the show. And maybe they just want it to be fun and frivolous. They don't want it to be serious and authentic. So who am I to say?
Yeah, yeah. So much can be dictated by budget and all kinds of things that we don't know. So our careers go back to the '80s, and I'm just wondering what sort of changes you have seen in the industry in your department over the years.
Well, the department is growing so much because, the 80s and the 90s was go big or go home. So everybody brought 10 times the gear they needed, which means you need 5 times the people. Um, so the departments have really grown, and the trucks have grown. The task assignments have been really broken up, and you have specialists in various different aspects of costuming now. It's quite fabulous to see the development of people through their craft and what they become really good at. I love that. And
What about,
give
sorry, go
people,
ahead.
I love being able to give people opportunity to express their craft and to learn. I think that's very exciting.
How have technologies influenced your department?
Well, the advent of green screen and the more to the point, the Dave grants, what was it? Digital arts, virtual experiments or something. I don't know. The BC
Mhm.
government Dave grants. Did you ever do any of those shows where the whole studio was lined in green screen?
I've done a few green screen shows like iRobot, for example, but yeah.
Yeah. We it's all a learning curve. I did one that was totally green screen, and the green color wavelength just messes with absolutely everything. So trying to plan out your palette is, you can't. It's unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. Down to the point where I did one show, the characters were in a very dark Douglas fir green color, and there was a patch that on set had to get sewn onto a sleeve it all of a sudden, and the costume person brought out all their thread in this full studio surrounded by green screen, and she picked the best color. It just looked great. She stitched the patch on, filmed the show, brought the costume into the trailer that night. She had used the absolute opposite color on the color spectrum for thread once we were in real daylight. So that's how unpredictable it can be. I lived through the high def resolution, and how our costuming rules kind of had to change with that because the camera couldn't focus on very small prints. It would just moray and shake and jiggle all the time. Um, the surround cameras, the motion capture and surround cameras, they're very interesting too. So no, there's been huge changes. Technological, the drone shots, they've been fun. I had a great time on Guam with the drone shots at the Anderson Air Force Base. Had to get
It's a
approval from the Pentagon to do that.
very top secret, very hush hush. Yeah.
Yeah, sure, let this film crew come in with their drones.
It's amazing what they let us do sometimes.
Mhm, mhm.
You've been nominated for 6 Emmy Awards, including very recently. Is that right? Am I off on that?
Thanks. No, I didn't know that.
Well, that's according to the IMDb, which isn't always 100% accurate, but I believe it. And
Oh,
and
totally. No, that's
well,
real.
it's funny you wouldn't keep track of that. I mean, that's it's an exciting thing, and I was just going to ask you, is that a helpful thing? Not that you've ever had trouble getting a job, but is that a helpful thing, or can it hinder you?
Well, to set the record straight, I've only been nominated once for an Emmy.
What
I've
show
been,
is that for?
that was Battlestar, on Battlestar.
Oh, wow.
It could have been other Canadian awards or so. I don't know. I'm gonna have to check that out. I don't look
You have to
myself up.
you have to
Um,
check out the IMDb.
yeah. Does it help? Well, I I'm pretty sure it does. I mean, back when I was nominated, in Canada here, the unions, we didn't really pay much attention to the crews that were nominated. Now, thankfully, they're just celebrating like crazy. So I'm very happy to see that come about, and acknowledgement for people.
No, absolutely. Um, and the whole thing about you're only as good as your last show, it's more important that you're doing certain shows. And I love the fact you said you like all genres. It's like you wouldn't want to do the same kind of show after show after show, or just have a career of westerns. There are some designers that do that, and I
Yeah,
never understand that.
Willie Nelson plays the same tune all the time too, but people love him. So
That's true. With the same four chords. That's absolutely true. I wonder if I dare ask you about AI as a design tool, or if you've been sort of seeing what's happening in the last couple of years regarding AI being used in the industry. And maybe I'll give you a little spiel first, because I about 2 years ago, when I sort of became more aware of this, somebody had put into AI, hey, produce some images as though David Cronenberg directed a zombie film. And I saw about 8 photographs that were not just, there was makeup designs, there was set designs, there was costume designs and prop designs, and they were good and they were really interesting. And it kind of looked like Cronenberg's work, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And then I was like, well, this is startling because we know how producers and studios can think about, hey, why would we have a production designer on for like, 10 months or a year when we could get a fast, quick start with AI? And then a judge in California had ruled, because this is becoming a legal matter, that you can't copyright designs from AI because they're from existing sources. And that's a really interesting thing. But I can see a future, a very near future, where they will say, let's start with the AI design as a starting point, and then have our designers tweak those designs so we can copyright them. But of course, that means less work and employment for these designers. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, yeah, I've dabbled with the AI when it came out a few years ago. And my takeaway from it was that whoever wants to generate these images, they have to have a lot of knowledge to come up with the words to tell the AI program what to do. So my fear was, oh boy, I hope that we get super creative people directing these AI computers. Otherwise, it's going to become a very grayish world. So I haven't
Do,
heard of anyone actually using it yet. So, and I've got
yeah,
a friend who's an art teacher. She was teaching a class in it, and I don't know. It seems to me that the general population is onto it now. And so they want to say, well, that's really cool. Oh, it's AI. I think we would much more appreciate it if I knew that you had really done the work. So it's kind of interesting where it'll go.
yeah, and that's similar to the whole CGI thing, that gone crazy over the last couple of decades or so, and people then are now promoting their films as, hey, the latest Bond film, those are practical stunts and were practical effects, and that's appreciated. And there's always some CGI in just about everything now. I think it might be the same with AI, but it does remain to be seen. Um, I'm just concerned that it extracts the artist to some degree from the process. And when you're sort of starting with existing or pre-existing artistic materials,
Yeah, for
I mean,
sure.
can make the research good though, I guess, but you don't want to take that fun away either, right? Because research, as you said, is one of the more enjoyable parts.
Mhm.
What advice would you have for somebody who wants to get into the film industry, into the costume department? I mean, what's a good place to start? Any do's and don'ts?
Um, I would say think carefully about it. Be a responsible person. Follow instruction and bring your initiative.
Yeah. What
It's such a huge department that there's so many different um, abilities put towards the craft that you have to just bring it down to a basic level that I just described. And know it's
uh,
collaborative. If you're not a team player, it's not going to work for you.
what
So,
is the sort of entry level position in the costume department?
it's kind of fascinating. A lot of people come in to the breakdown department, which is pretty cool because there's always someone there to teach them how to do it. But they also get to be involved from prep period. They're hearing all the goings ons that's going on in the warehouse. I always have my whole crew come to the meeting when we're still in prep so that everyone's learning from everyone. Um, So they get to be there and absorb a lot like a sponge and then sponge it all into the costumes, if you will, metaphorically. So I think that's a really good starting point. It used to be that being a stitcher was a really good starting point, but on the West Coast here now, the projects that are constructing costumes are getting fewer and farther between. So that arena of people is shrinking.
Oh, just because of the nature of the shows that are happening now?
Yeah. I mean, that's why Alberta was great because it did so many Westerns. And, there wasn't a stock available. So we were all stitching like crazy to get this stock up and running. Um, no, there are rental houses in Western Canada, or you can get stuff out of LA or England or wherever.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So,
But can we talk
so
about the team effort of it all?
absolutely.
Yeah, I want to shift this a bit away from the costume department to how the costume department is involved with every other department in the film, because I'm hoping a lot of the folks that are here this evening may want to be, maybe they want to be the top dog and maybe they want to be on one of the sidelines kind of thing. So I think it's really important for people to know that the costume department is involved with so many different departments. I'm going to put a little share screen up here. Bear with me. Okay. So I've just done a wee screenshot from the internet showcasing the breakdown of film crew positions, to which I've added the word costumes to showcase that these are all of the people that we collaborate with on a production, be it a film, be it a television series, commercials, even. Um, so the producers, they always want to do approvals on the costumes. They want to have that control over what the show is going to look like. The executive producer is a fabulous support person, because they've actually probably had a lot to do with you being hired. The producer and the line producers are real day-to-day folks that you're dealing with all the time. Of course, the director wants to know what everyone's going to be wearing in all the scenes, and they very much are invested in giving their approval on everything. Hence, that's why I started doing costume storyboards that I could send out to everybody so that they could all say yay or nay. They could see the silhouettes, they could see the palettes, they could see the textures, they could see the colors. And that would be for every scene within the show. So they knew before the actors were coming to set what the actors were wearing. Director of photography, of course, sometimes they have different concerns with costumes. Obviously, the cast and the writer, believe it or not, a lot of times the writer has big influence on what the costumes are, be it they've written it in the script or they want to know what to put into the script, those kinds of aspects. So that's all the above the line folks that we deal with. Now the below the line, all of us regular people,
You've inserted your department everywhere.
you get it, you see it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're always involved with the production manager, and we're involved with locations because we need to know what the locations are, what the concerns are there, where we have space to put our stuff, the facilities, what are the facilities, where is the truck going to be? Often that's a location manager that we're dealing with. I like to go out on location scouts so that I can see what actual parameters that our department's going to be dealing with, so that I can prepare my on-set crew for that.
And know how much long underwear the actors need hidden under their costumes.
Exactly, that good kind of stuff. What kind of footwear they need? Is it a coral beach that's going to lacerate their feet, or is it cactuses, or what the heck's going on here? Under the production management team, we're always dealing with the production manager and the production coordinator, because we have costumes coming and going left, right, and center from all around the world. So that coordinator office is really important. And of course, the production accountant is super important. You asked earlier about costume departments and how they've changed. Now there is a production costume accountant, just keeping track of everything in and out, because we've got so much stock. I always tell my friends, yeah, I used to work in the movies, and it's not about the picture on screen moving, it's about all the stuff we move. And that's why it's called movies. Assistant directors, of course, the first AD, second and third AD, and the production assistants. We deal with all of those folks. Casting, of course, we deal with the director, the local casting director, the background performers directors, and the background performers wranglers. Costumes continuity, of course, we want to make sure that somebody has a green tie on and not a yellow one by mistake. The camera department, we always have to talk with them and find out what lenses they're using, what color filters they're using, all that good stuff. Costumes electrical, the main person that I've dealt with there has been the Jenny op, because when we get to a location, we need to ensure that we've got electricity to our trucks at the very, very, very beginning of the day and the very, very, very end of the day. So you want to be friends with the Jenny op. Moving over to costumes, stand-ins and background, of course, special effects, we're always dealing with them because of, for instance, blood, squib hits, all that kind of stuff. What's going on there? Well, the art department's obvious, the production designer, the set designer, the simplest story to tell of how you need to know what the set design and the set decorator's doing is the person in the bed. What color are the sheets? What color are the pajamas? That's the simplest one you have to deal with. Costume sound, we have to make sure that the materials used in our costumes are not going to cause problems for the sound mixer. You'll get a lot of guys wearing ties and the mic is between the tie and the shirt. So just in their breathing, there's an actual sound effect happening. So we're always dealing with that. People walking hard on wooden walkways, clomp, clomp, clomp. We're always helping with sound mixer. Stunts, well, that's a huge one, of course. We're very invested in the stunt department because we have to double the cast, but we also have to make sure that whatever we're doing costume wise is safe and will help the stunt person do their job, kind of thing. Is it fire protecting? Are there harnesses involved? There's so much work goes on there. Moving over to transportation, the captain and the drivers, of course, we're always trying to negotiate for the best truck going. And then, we need this, we need that. Where's the truck going to be? It always amazes me how they get those units into place and it all makes sense. Craft service and catering, well, we're there because we love them. That's why we go to work every day. Publicity, publicity is a huge part of costuming because it is kind of venturing into the fashion world. So we're always dealing with the media, be it from the studios, be it the unit publicist, be it the still photographer, when they're doing their shoots for preliminary advertisement, we're there because we have to dress all of the cast. Sets, as I mentioned earlier, we're always speaking with the set person and making sure that we're not putting somebody into clothing that's the very same color as the set. The props department, well, gosh, we're always dealing with the props department because sometimes costumes need to provide a garment that is hiding something in it, or One
Like
place
guns
that
and
we always,
holsters?
yeah, exactly, guns and holsters. We're always negotiating who's going to buy the purses and watches, because so many props masters don't want to touch that one with a 10-foot pole, especially purses. So we'll say we'll do that for you. And there you are, hair and makeup. Always,
It's,
always helping with.
last but not least.
Yes, no, exactly. So you can see how this little hierarchy chart is kind of, I would love to redesign this. When I have time, I will redesign this. So I
No,
just
it's
hope that shows everybody that we're super involved, super involved.
that really opens it up, and most people would not realize this, you know. And many of these crew people that are listed here are surprised to find out how your department relates with them and them to your department. That's an excellent illustration. I think we have a question here. Some questions coming in. I was going to post questions. Well, I saw it a second ago, but it's vanished now. Um, but if any, I think people are going to ask questions. I think they're going to put them in the chat for us to see, I believe. Oh,
Yeah,
hang on.
I can
There
see
we
that.
go. How would you recommend getting your foot in the door? Hmm.
Well, it's very important that a person has an understanding of clothing. And, you've heard me say this again, silhouette, texture, palette, and fit. You've got to understand those things. I would always hire someone who knew how to construct garments. In fact, it's part of the membership application to unions. You have to show that you know how to sew. That's super, super important. Even say you want to be an illustrator, the best illustrators know how garments are put together. So go to the store on Thursday nights and just look at the costume, the clothing inside out, and see how it's made.
Do
Um,
people have to have trained at some kind of course? Because I know there's small courses or courses like at Cap College has had a program. Is that an essential thing or just a good thing to have as well?
I think if you're applying to the union, it's essential. You have to prove that you've had some education and or experience. So I believe that they would say, oh, you've got theater experience of making costuming. You probably know a lot from that. And you're absolutely right. Cap University has a program. It's either 2 or 4 years. I'm not sure. I don't remember. There's a place called the Cut or the Cutting Room. They have a very in-depth program on how to make clothing. Langara University now has a program more directed towards fashion, but it's a good start as well. So, I always used to say to people, why would you want to go and work in a restaurant's kitchen if you didn't know how to boil an egg? You have to have some preliminary skills, right?
Absolutely. Somebody's referring to your diagram saying that you were showing all different departments that costume works with. Who actually would be the person liaising with those departments? Would there be a dedicated person for each department, or would it be one singular person from the costume department? Basically, do you need different skills sets to be the person working with locations versus casting versus publicity?
Sure. No, that's a really good question. Thank you for that. Within our department, we have the costume designer, the assistant costume designer, a department coordinator, on-set supervisor, truck supervisor. So definitely the costume designer deals with all the above the line people. Not to say that once the production gets to filming, the on-set supervisor would probably be dealing with the director and the DOP. If it was some immediate action that had to be taken. Below the line, we can kind of divvy it out in terms of who gets hired when. So the costume designer is always hired first. And then the production or the costume coordinator comes on, and they do a lot of the administrative work. So they can deal with some issues with the production manager and the coordinator. They'll take over the shipping kind of thing. Um, the art department, that's generally the costume designer and the assistant costume designer that would deal with that. Stunts department, well, casting department is definitely the costume designer, the assistant designer, and the coordinator, because A, you want to know who has been cast. B, you have to get them on the telephone and get their measurements. C, you have to set up a time frame for fitting schedules. So that, we all divvy out who's going to do what aspect of that work. Hair and makeup, again, I think that costume designer, assistant designer, and the on-set supervisors deal with the hair and makeup department. Locations, that can be the department coordinator. They're looking after a lot of logistics, so they're dealing with all of that aspect of it, and the set supervisor, because they're there and they know what's coming in. Set department, again, that can be the costume designer and the assistant designer. Props department, the costume designer and the assistant. Stunts department, again, that's kind of a threefold action plan, because the designer's talking with the coordinator, and the assistant's probably helping getting all of the stuff together for the stunts, and then the onset supervisor is actually dealing with the stunt people. So we're passing a lot of information down the line to everybody in our department all the time. Sound department, that's generally the onset supervisor who's dealing with issues that come up immediately on the day, kind of thing. Special effects department happens in props. That's the designer, the assistant designer, and the coordinator, I would say. The buyers get involved in this too, because if we're squibbing somebody, the poor buyers have to find 6 shirts that are the very same. So it goes way through the department then. Transport department, that's generally the department coordinator that's dealing with them. Post-production supervisors, if there's any issues, then they'll call the costume designer and say, this guy had the wrong tie on in such and such a scene. What do we do?
Wow.
Yeah, so that it doesn't go, so that he can fix it before the word goes up the line, kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Visual effects would be costume designer, assistant, and coordinator, and the on-set person. Publicity, generally the costume designer. Who have I missed? That's
There's a
kind
lot
of
of crossover skills, a lot of crossover skills you have to have from all the members of your department.
Yeah, it's a total Rubik's cube, and that's why communications is so important. What systems to use for communication. One trick that I always did in the mornings when we were in pre-production still, I would have department meetings that involved everybody in the department. We'd have these meetings at the beginning of the day. And the basic question that I would have everyone speak to, so in a great big circle, have everyone speak to, how is your list going? What have you completed? What do you have to do still? And who can help you complete it? So that we could really build a team. And a lot of people really enjoyed that. A lot of people were really intimidated by it.
But
But
it
it,
sets the tone, it sets a plan, it sets everybody on the same page. That's great.
yeah.
We're actually thinking our last minute here. I can't believe it already. There's one question I just wanted to throw out here that says, is or should a costumer be involved in creating video games? Now, have you ever heard of a costume designer working on video games or that kind of character design?
Yeah, I have heard of it. I haven't done it personally, but I have heard of younger people doing a crossover there. So, yay.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, interesting. And
yeah.
and somebody had talked about union versus non-union shows. And just your opinions on how you get your foot in the door with one of the other union shows. Well, you have to be in the union, obviously, to be hired. In the non-union world, is it a little bit easier to get started there?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, the again, I'll go back to do theater work, get your kicks in theater, and then apply to ACFC and then apply to IATSE and do all the Hallmark shows in between. If you can't get on the union show, do as many Hallmark shows as you can.
You just described what many of my graduates do. That's great. Well, I suppose I'm waiting to see if any of our other crew are basically saying that we need to wrap it up. I'm assuming that we do need to do that, but they're saying thanks for the insightful talk. And Glenn, I really appreciate it. It's great seeing you after all this time. Very, very insightful, and I'm hoping everybody can kind of have a better idea now of the basically the whole thing that costume, sorry, comprises. And
Yes.
it's a big business, and we all work together. And like you said, communication is key for all of us.
Great to see you, Stan. Let's get together sometime.
Absolutely, I'll help you build that new house. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Bye bye.